Jesus and His love.
Hi, my name's Andy Robison, and I'm currently the director of the West Virginia School of Preaching. I'm the third director there. Emmanuel Daugherty served for the first 9 years in that capacity. Denver Cooper served for the second 9 years, and I've been there about 3.5 years. I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce you to the West Virginia School of Preaching in case you haven't heard of us or haven't heard an update or just might want to learn a little bit more. It'd be my pleasure to kind of give you a walkthrough of what we do and how we do it there. Around 1994, in the early 90s sometime, a group of preachers decided that maybe it would be a good idea if we had a non-traditional setting for training preachers in the Ohio Valley. There were colleges around and they were doing their thing, they were doing fine, but some fellows who are a little bit older in life and didn't have the opportunity to go to college for religious studies might want to change careers, they thought, and they might want to do this, but they couldn't afford all of the tuition, they couldn't afford 4 years of their life, so they wanted to find a non-traditional way to do this. Well, there were other preaching schools after whom they could model themselves, but just none in our area. Well, we wanted to make a 2-year setting where guys could come and learn the Bible, learn Bible-related subjects, and do so tuition-free. Do so at a pace that was hard and was intense, but allowed them to not take 4 years off of their life, take 2 years and study hard and learn the things they needed to learn, and then go out and spread the gospel to people around the area, hold jobs as preachers, maybe be vocational preachers, tent-making preachers, the way the Apostle Paul was, convert people to Christ while they're working their secular jobs, preach for congregations during the weekends while they're working their secular jobs during the week. In the 20-some years that we've been there, we've trained about 80 gospel preachers in that regard. Many of them are full-time preachers for local congregations. Some of them are vocational preachers. Some of them aren't preaching anymore, but I suppose every school has that. We're thankful for the influence that the West Virginia School of Preaching has had in these last 20-some years that they've been in Moundsville, West Virginia. That group of preachers I was referring to a moment ago came to the elders at the Hillview Terrace Church of Christ and asked them if they would be willing to oversee this work of a preaching school. I remember one of the elders at that time. Now, I wasn't involved in that group of preachers, but you see, this was my home congregation. I grew up there, left town in 1983 because that's when I went off to college. The school wasn't in existence yet. I remember at the time the school was starting, though, one of the elders at that time said to me, "I can't think of a better way to spread the gospel of Christ. I can't think of a better way to be involved in mission work than to train gospel preachers to go out." Indeed, that's what God wanted us to do. In 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 2, Paul lays down the principle to young Timothy that he wants him to train other people to take the gospel of Christ. That's what we want to do at the West Virginia School of Preaching. We're having some good years right now. We're thankful for that. And we invite you to learn more about us as we take a journey through, well, what a student might do if he were to come to the West Virginia School of Preaching. We have a website. Let's suppose that a student out there, a potential student, someone who it might be interested in the West Virginia School of Preaching, would like to learn more about us. He can easily get on his computer, go to WVSOP.com, West Virginia School of Preaching, WVSOP.com, see a lot about our school, see practically our whole catalog there, all of our courses. He can see a catalog of our library online. He can see several pictures of our facilities online, and he can click on the Apply Here button and fill out the fields in an application that will send directly to me. I'll pass it on to the elders. When we get an application like that, the first thing I do is call the applicant and thank him, or email and thank him, and then I'll check the references that he gives. And if those references check out, what we do is invite that fellow in for an interview with the elders. Our elders are very hands-on. They like to make sure that we're getting good quality candidates for preaching the gospel of Christ. We're not interested, you see, in just having warm bodies fill our chairs. I don't think that any school of preaching or college worth its salt would be. We're not interested in that either. We want guys who really want to preach and who have the capacity to preach. The way I like to say it is this: we want fellows who intellectually could do about anything, but by passion could only preach the glorious gospel of Jesus Christ. We want that kind of fellow. And for that reason, we have an interview with them to determine more about them before we admit them to our school. Now, if they're admitted, the kind of rigorous schedule that they would have would demand some things of them. I mentioned to you that we're tuition free. Well, there's no such thing as a free lunch. You realize that. That tuition-free education is provided by donors who give to the school. Churches and individuals give to us in our school fund that's overseen by the elders of the Hillview Terrace Church of Christ. They're very careful with it. They're very good stewards. But that provides for the minimal payment of the teachers that we give. It provides for the upkeep of the facilities. It provides for the utility bills. It provides for the office supplies and the payment of the secretary and library books and all sorts of things that are needed to provide an education. The guys don't have to pay us any tuition. As a matter of fact, if they're single men, they're able to live in our dormitory for free as long as there's capacity for it. The dormitory was the rather large-sized preacher's house before, but now we've converted it into a dormitory that can hold up to 7 guys, and they live there rent-free. The only expense that they have is a sharing of the utility bills. The only other expense a student would have regarding the school directly is that he pays for his books. On neither of these things do we make any sort of profit. It's just a turnaround. It's a service that we buy their books for them and turn them into them. If they have the books otherwise or they find them otherwise, then they don't have to get them from us at all. We don't make any money on that. We run strictly, of course, on donations. When a student then wants to come to us, if he's been admitted, he will be responsible for this. He'll be responsible for raising his own living support. Now, for a young single fellow, that might be a lot less than a fellow who's in his 40s or 50s and married with some children at home and things like that. There might be some more responsibility. So that amount is going to vary. To individually do this, to personalize this a little bit more, we made a change a few years back where we asked our students to raise their support through their home congregations. That is, they send out their letters to churches they think might be interested in supporting them, to individuals they think might be interested in supporting them. And they ask those fellows, those individuals, those churches, to send their money to their home congregation, not to the West Virginia School of Preaching. That way, their eldership or their local congregation oversees it and remits to them their living expenses on whatever basis they've decided and agreed upon between themselves, and the school doesn't have any hand in it. That way, when they're done with school, if there's anything left over, that's between them and their eldership about what they're going to do with it. A lot of elderships so far have just given any leftover to that student to help him get set up in his first work. Because when you move someplace, there are expenses. There are down payments, there are utility fees, there are all kinds of things. There are moving expenses. So that's worked out rather well for us, having that system. We're able to raise money for our general tuition-free fund and keeping up the building and so forth, and they're able to raise their funds for their living expenses. Now, someone might ask, why don't they get jobs while they're there? And the answer is simply because they don't have time. If a fellow enrolls in school, he'll start about mid-August. His schedule will look something like this. He'll have 8 consecutive quarters of study. Each quarter has about 10 weeks of instruction. He'll have 8 weeks off in the summer between the 2 years and appropriate breaks along the way. But it is an intense schedule, as you'll see. Well, I'll just tell you. Every morning, Monday through Friday, from 8:30 to 9, we'll have our chapel service. In our chapel service, the students will read a scripture, say a prayer, sing a song, and someone will give a lesson for 15 to 25 minutes. That could be a student, and if it's a student, it's a great place for them to get started. We've had fellows come to us who have several years of preaching experience on the side. And we've had fellows come to us who have never spoken in public before at all. In the latter case, we'd like to get them started in chapel, and if they start feeling comfortable there, or we feel they ought to start feeling comfortable there, we'll switch them to our Wednesday night invitation, our Wednesday night devotional service at the Hillview Terrace Church. And then once they're comfortable there, they can preach about as much as they want to. I think that this is one advantage that we might have over the situations of some other schools of preaching. It's really by happenstance. We didn't design it, but we happen to have a lot of congregations in our area, who rely on us for preaching. Every first Sunday, this fellow might go to that congregation. Every third Sunday, he might go to that congregation, and so forth. Right now, we have 10 students, 3 in the second year class, 7 in the first year class. About 5 in each class is a good goal for us, and it's averaging out to that right now. All of those students, with the exception of 1 or 2, are busy every Sunday preaching the gospel of Christ. They get plenty of experience. It all starts in chapel. That's 8:30 to 9. Then from 9 a.m. to noon and 1 p.m. to 4 every day, they're in class. That class time is pretty intense, and they'll have homework each night. probably 4 to 5 hours worth of homework. Now you can do the math. If they're in class that long and doing that much homework each night, they have to sleep sometime. They might have to take care of family responsibilities at some time. They have to get their lessons ready for Sunday. They don't have time for outside jobs. That's why they have to raise their living expenses. When they come to school and they're in those classes, their attention span is going to be challenged. Here's one reason. We're a little bit different from some other schools, neither better nor worse, I suppose, but a little bit different in that we rely on pretty much volunteer teachers. Our teachers are not on staff full-time. They are gospel preachers in the area who give of their time. We're awfully thankful to them and thankful to their elders and their congregations for allowing them to have the time. They give of their time to come teach for us. Some of them drive as much as 3.5 hours one way to come and teach a day for us. Therefore, our schedule is a little bit different. We don't have Monday, Wednesday, Friday classes like you might have had in college, like I had in college, Tuesday, Thursday classes that are the same class. When one of these teachers drives in, we can't make him do that Monday, Wednesday, and Friday of every week for 10 weeks, and some of them teach all year, so that would be really an impossibility. What we do rather is ask them to teach their class all day that day, 6 hours of one class. Or we have some half-day classes, 3 hours for the morning, 3 hours for the afternoon. But that way, they're in that class all day, and that has its drawbacks, I suppose you might say. It might have a challenge to the modern American attention span, I might say cynically, but it has a lot of benefits as well. Because once you get into the groove of it, you really enjoy digging deeply into a subject without being interrupted every 50 minutes or without being interrupted every 2 hours. You can really dig deeply into a subject without having a lot of review. They'll have their Monday class, they'll have their Tuesday class, they'll have their Wednesday class, and they know what's happening throughout the week then on. Our teachers, I might say, are volunteer. At the end of the year, at the end of the school year, they get one check, and that's for a little bit of mileage, not anywhere close to what government mileage rates are for business expenses, and maybe a little bit of a bonus if the elders see that we have the funds that year. It's their giving that has allowed the school to remain financially solvent through the years, and we're thankful to them for it. We have our curriculum that I want to cover with you. I want to try to give you an idea of all the things that a guy will be studying, but first, let me give you an idea of a couple of extracurricular things that we have. There's not much time for extracurricular things, but there are some areas that we think are very important. One, the North Central Regional Correctional Facility is close to our facility, and so the guys have a chance to go and do some work in prison. We hold the services at that facility every third Sunday and every fifth Sunday, and our students have the opportunity, they're not required, but they do have the opportunity to be a part of that work if they would like. Also, thanks to David Kenny at the Wadsworth, Ohio Church of Christ, they have the opportunity to do some television work, much like I'm doing right now. And then, I need to tell you this also before I forget. When a student is done with our curriculum, remember, we're not an accredited organization. We really don't want to be an accredited organization. We realize there's a place for that. We realize that's important in many regards, but we don't want that. We just want to train guys to preach the gospel of Christ. However, we are recognized as a high-quality educational institution by several accredited institutions. For example, after a fellow graduates from us, he can go on to Freed-Hardeman University and they'll give him 32 hours of credit. That's about 1 year's worth of credit there. And you think, well, he spent 2 years at the West Virginia School of Preaching. Yeah, but think of it like this. He spent 2 years tuition free and he just saved 1 year of big tuition bucks at a private university. Or Heritage Christian University in Florence, Alabama will give him 56 hours of credit if he wants to continue his education there. But backing up, we like to think that once a fellow is done with our education, he's ready to preach the gospel of Christ on a full-time basis. Our curriculum, I like to divide into 3 planks. I don't suppose it's that much different from any other preaching school, but I like to divide it into 3 planks, and those planks are these. 1, the Christian evidences plank. That is, we want guys to be able to defend that there is a God, and that the Bible is His Word, and that Christ is the Son of God, really truly resurrected from the dead in history. We want them to be able to know those things and know about those things so they can defend those things in a world that doesn't seem to believe those things anymore. Secondly, we have a plank where we want them to know the Bible and Bible-related subjects and know it well. And thirdly, we have a communications plank where we want them to be able to communicate effectively. Because if they know all these things and can't communicate them effectively, really what good is it? Christianity is an evangelistic religion. It's not a secret thing. It's supposed to be told. We want to teach them how to tell and how to tell effectively. Let's break each one of those down, shall we? The Christian evidences plank is so very important personally to me simply because of the world the way it is now. I'm told that 50 or 60 years ago, you might ask for a Bible study with someone and they might be willing to give you a Bible study. They might not agree with you, but they might be willing to give you a Bible study. And you might say to them something like this: if I show you in the Bible where something is true, will you believe it? And they might say yes, and then you'd proceed from there. But increasingly in our world, we have a culture that does not believe in a God and does not believe in a Bible. So if you ask, can I show you something in the Bible? They might say, Bible? Why should I believe that? Well, because it's from God. God, why should I believe in Him? We want to know why. I believe those things can be defended. We have a different starting point than we did all those years ago in this country. It's the same old gospel, the same true gospel, but a different starting point. And that's just as biblical as it can be. When Paul went to Antioch in Pisidia in Acts chapter 13 and spoke in the synagogue to a bunch of Old Testament believing Jews, do you remember where he started his lesson? Basically like this: the God of our fathers brought up the children of Israel out of Egypt, brought them through a period of the judges, gave them a kingdom when they wanted one, got them to King David. David made many prophecies about the Messiah, and then he worked on his way on up to Christ and the gospel and salvation. But when Paul was in Athens speaking to a bunch of philosophers who were mostly, if any, were Jewish at all, who didn't know the Old Testament scriptures and were only gathered, as the record says, to hear some new thing, what good would it have done him to start with, the God of our fathers brought us up out of Egypt? Well, they wouldn't have known what he was talking about, and they wouldn't have been on the same page. So where did he start? In the city of Athens, there were 30,000 idols and 10,000 people. They even had an idol, in case they missed a god, that said, to the unknown God. That's where Paul started. He said, this unknown God, let me declare Him to you. He's the God who made the heaven and the earth and the sea and everything that is in it. He's the God who has done all these things. We are also His offspring. Some of your own poets have said that. He used their own philosophers and their own poets who were pagan in nature to illustrate and indicate that we are designed by an intelligent being whom we know as the God of the Bible. He then proceeded on to those great verses in Acts 17, 30 and 31. These times of ignorance God overlooked, but now commands all men everywhere to repent, because He has appointed a day on which He will judge the world in righteousness by the man whom He has ordained. He has given assurance of this to all by raising Him from the dead. He got to the resurrection. He got to judgment simply because he started with the gospel of Christ, but he had to start at a different place than he did in Antioch and Pisidia. Preachers that we send out today have to start with, do you believe in God? And then they need to be able to know how to defend that. We have two very fine teachers in this regard. Charles Pugh has his master's of philosophy from the Harding Graduate School of Religion and studied at the feet of Thomas Warren, who was one of the best debaters of atheists in the 20th century. Charles teaches a whole quarter on how to defend the existence of God, another whole quarter on how to defend the inspiration of the Bible, and another full quarter on how to defend the deity of Jesus Christ, that He really is resurrected from the dead. Terry Varner, who is a prolific writer and scholar and gospel preacher in our area for years, also teaches a couple classes that I kind of loosely lump under this plank. One on hermeneutics, how to understand the Bible, and one on general biblical introduction, how we got the Bible. That's our first plank. Our second plank is that we want guys to be able to know the Bible and Bible-related subjects. So when they come in, they're taught Bible archaeology and geography by Ed Malott. Ed Malott's the preacher at the Steelton Church of Christ in New Martinsville, West Virginia, and does a fine job preaching and teaching there and teaching for us as well. The Bible archaeology and geography class gives them an overview, an idea of what happened in Bible history and where it happened and what archaeological discoveries have been made concerning those things. We have a class on Godhead, God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit, that's taught by Brent Gallagher, preacher at the Oakwood Road Church of Christ in Fairmont, West Virginia. We have a class on marriage and family, which is taught by Peter Ray Cole, who is a graduate of ours and also has his master's degree in counseling from Amridge University and is setting up his counseling practice. We have a class on marriage and family because family is so important to a preacher, and he'll be having to deal with family issues in the congregation where he is. We have a class on church history and a class on restoration history to give the guys an idea of the historical perspective in which they live. Our teacher for those are Mark Jones, who has his bachelor's from Freed-Hardeman University and many hours toward his master's. Mark is the preacher at the Pumpkin Center Church of Christ in Fairview, West Virginia. He is taking 1 year leave of absence right now, and so Bruce Doherty, who used to teach those classes for us and has his master's in those fields from Harding Graduate School of Religion, has come back and is teaching those for us this year, and might be some in the future, we don't know, because there is some turnover in these classes. Bruce lives in Florida, but he's teaching for us over the internet, and we're thankful that he's able to do that. We also have a class in New Testament Church that is taught by Ben Jones, who has his degree from Freed-Hardeman University and is the preacher at the University Church of Christ in Morgantown, West Virginia. And then we have a class on denominational doctrines and world religions, how to answer those things, how to answer those subjects. It used to be called denominational doctrines, this class, but we added world religions to it because when the school started 20 years ago, we didn't have that much concern in this country about things like Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, but they're coming here fast and furious, so we need to know how to answer them. Steve Hagewood has his master's degree from Freed-Hardeman University and is the preacher at the North End Church of Christ in Parkersburg, West Virginia. Steve teaches that class for us. And then we have a class in song leading that I teach so the guys can have some basic understanding of those musical things that help us to lead better singing in congregations. They might be responsible for it in small congregations or be responsible for teaching others about it. And then we have a class in New Testament Greek, actually 4 quarters of New Testament Greek, taught by Steve Stevens of Hundred, West Virginia, who knows his Greek language and knows it well. It's a very difficult class, but I can tell you that the guys who come through it feel rewarded that they have taken it and they know their Greek very, very well. Those are some Bible-related subjects. Then we go through the Bible. We, like many preaching schools, want to give students an introduction to every verse of every chapter of every book of the Bible before they're done with our school. Let's start in Genesis. Genesis and Exodus are taught by Jack Gilchrist. As a matter of fact, Jack teaches all of the historical books of the Old Testament in 4 separate quarters. First Genesis and Exodus, then Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, then Hebrew History 1 and Hebrew History 2, taking us from Joshua, Judges, all the way up through the book of Esther. Jack has his degree in history from Freed-Hardeman University, so we think he's well qualified for this. He's also one of our graduates and is a gospel preacher as well. Jack teaches those classes for us. And then we come to the wisdom literature. The book of Job, as well as the book of Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, are currently taught by Michael Forshea, who just received his Master's of Arts and his Master's of Divinity from Freed-Hardeman University after graduating from our school several years ago. Mike is doing a great job teaching those classes for us. He's the preacher at Vermilion, Ohio currently. And then Terry Jones teaches the book of Psalms and Song of Solomon for us. Terry is the preacher at the Pennsboro Church of Christ, has his certificate from the East Tennessee School of Preaching, which is now named otherwise, in the High Valley University. He has a bachelor's degree from there and has been the preacher at the Pennsboro Church for some 25 years, is one of their elders now, one of our original faculty members. He does a great job teaching the necessary book of Psalms to our students, as well as the book of Song of Solomon. When we come to the prophetic literature, almost all of the books are taught by Emmanuel Daugherty. I teach Jeremiah and Lamentations. Gene West teaches the book of Ezekiel. Gene, I should say, is and has been the preacher at the Hillview Terrace Church of Christ for many years, actually going 2 rounds at that. A very well-educated man in different fields who's a very voluminous author and has his own commentaries on several books. Gene is teaching the book of Ezekiel for us. I'm teaching the book of Jeremiah and Lamentations. The rest of the prophetic books, including Isaiah, also Daniel, with a long section on premillennialism, because a lot of the falsehoods of premillennialism come out of misunderstandings in the book of Daniel. And then all the minor prophets are taught by Emmanuel Daugherty. Emmanuel's a graduate of the Memphis School of Preaching, a graduate with his master's degree from the Alabama Christian School of Religion, as it was called then. And he does a great job. Matter of fact, people are calling from all over the country looking for his material on the minor prophets. He recently had to move to Florida because of some health concerns and for being closer to some family, and he's able to teach over the internet, continue his teaching from there for us. We're very thankful for that. In the New Testament, the life of Christ, the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, are taught by Aaron Birch. Aaron is one of our graduates from 2006, went on to Freed-Hardeman and got his bachelor's degree, is working toward his master's degree. Aaron's a very intelligent fellow who teaches the life of Christ for us. The Gospel of John is taught by Steve Hagewood. I'd mentioned Steve before. The book of Acts is taught by Gene West. He brings his own commentary to that class. The book of Romans, along with the book of Galatians, because of similarity in content, are taught together. They're taught by Paolo De Luca. Paolo grew up in Italy, married Cindy Inman, as she was formerly known, the daughter of Clifton Inman, who was a well-respected preacher in our area. They spent 25 years laboring in the church in Italy and then moved here, and Paolo's now an American citizen, preaches at the Bridge Street congregation in New Martinsville, West Virginia. The book of 1 Corinthians is taught by Ed Malott. The book of 2 Corinthians, along with James, is taught by Emmanuel Daugherty. The prison epistles, those that Paul wrote from his first Roman imprisonment, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, and Philemon, are taught by Ben Jones. The books of 1 Thessalonians through Titus are taught by Steve Hagewood. I teach the book of Hebrews. Terry Jones teaches the books of 1 Peter through Jude, and Gene West teaches the book of Revelation. That's our second plank. Our third plank is that we want guys to be able to communicate the Bible well. We have 2 quarters of English grammar. I suppose it's nobody's favorite class, but we have a teacher who does an excellent job with it. It makes it fun for the guys, and yet they're learning as they go along. That's Jeff Rich from Bellsville, Ohio, the preacher there, who has a lot of education, including a lot of work at Harding Graduate School of Religion. Jeff does a good job teaching that class. What we want to do in that class is remind the guys of parts of speech so that when they get to their Greek class the next year, it's not all so foreign to them. And we also want to teach them to write some basic papers using MLA format, learning how to research in the library, not plagiarize, and codify their ideas appropriately. In that class, we want to teach them to speak in such a way that, they may not have perfect grammar. I don't. They may not have perfect grammar, but at least they're not detracting from the gospel of Christ with bad grammar. We want to teach them those sorts of things. Then we have 3 quarters of homiletics. The homiletic art is simply the art of designing, preparing, delivering a sermon. Terry Jones teaches those, and he's just a master both at doing it and teaching how to do it. He does a great job for us there. Our 4th quarter of homiletics is taught by Terry Varner. Terry has been preaching the gospel for over 60 years. Our 4th quarter of homiletics is really more about the work of a preacher, what a preacher does from Monday through Saturday. I'm fond of saying this: the easiest thing that I do as a gospel preacher is stand up and give a sermon on Sunday. It's the rest of the week that gets tough, and dealing with people and dealing with situations. Well, Terry knows how to give the guys an introduction to that. We at least can give them some sort of feel for it on top of the book knowledge that they get. And then the last class I'll mention to you is personal evangelism and prayer. Van Sprague is our teacher for that. Van is a graduate of ours in 2006, and when I was looking for a teacher for this class, he just came to mind because I happened to have known him at the time that he was having a whole lot of personal Bible studies. I've seen him work in personal Bible studies. I've seen him talk with people. I've been the silent partner as he works with the Scriptures, works with reason, works with philosophy to help people believe that there is a God and to help people come to a knowledge of the Scriptures. He's had a great deal of success in doing that. I've seen him in situations where one person had invited us and another person was angry that we were there. And that person claimed that she was more of a pagan background than anything. And he sowed the seed so lovingly and so kindly, reasoning so well from the idea that there has to be a God, that there has to be a Creator, and then using the Scripture some, that that couple was both very thankful when we were done and very thankful that they came, and thanked Van profusely for coming and sharing the gospel with them. He's just very good at teaching that. He teaches the personal evangelism class in a role play setting where the guys have to deal with someone that he's playing the role of who might come from a different background. He gives them a different background each week. And so they really are well taught in personal evangelism. At the West Virginia School of Preaching, we don't want to just train preachers to stand in pulpits. We want to train them to evangelize, to teach the gospel of Christ. People need the glorious gospel of Christ just like they always have. In our world that seems to be getting more and more wicked, people need it more than ever. It's the only hope that people have for getting through this life and getting to something better. It's the only hope that society has. If you're interested in the West Virginia School of Preaching, we would encourage you to give us a call. Thank you for your time and your attention to this presentation.
His sonship proclaim, the Christ is alive, the Christ is alive, the Christ is alive. God's Word is alive, God's Word is alive, God's Word is the Bible and it is alive. God's Word is alive, God's Word is alive, God's Word is the Bible and it is alive. The Spirit inspired the great men of God, who penned all the message while here on this sod. It sharpens and swords and it pierces the same. Its powers is filling, its worth we proclaim. God's Word is alive, God's Word is alive, God's Word